we will move to our keynote speaker, who is this year an eminently qualified personality. Irwin Cotler is a Canadian politician. He was a member of the Canadian House of Representatives of the Canadian Parliament. He was a Minister of Justice and General Attorney in the Canadian Liberal government, but for a long time he's been also a human rights activist and defender and a lawyer for many persecuted human rights activists. He represented Nelson Mandela in South Africa, Jacobo Timmerman in Latin America, Nathan Sharansky, the former prisoner of conscience in the former Soviet Union, and he's still at it many years later, and I'm happy to say he's also an old friend. So, Irwin, would you like to join us and give us your wisdom?
Thank you, Michael. I'm delighted to be here and to participate in the common cause which brings us together, the struggle for human rights and human dignity. And as Vaclav Havel would put it, that this struggle for human rights and human dignity is very much our struggle, the struggle for ourselves, because in what we say, or more importantly, in what we do, we make a statement about ourselves as a people. We make a statement about ourselves as people. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation and respect for Michael Zandowski for his engagement in this struggle for human rights in the best tradition of Vaclav Havel, with whom he was closely associated. And I want to congratulate all three Havel Prize nominees. They are the personification of the Vaclav Havel legacy, of living in truth, particularly in a post-truth universe, of pursuing justice and combating injustice at a time when we are witnessing a resurgent global authoritarianism represented by states like Russia and China and Iran and Turkey, engage both in a massive domestic oppression from within and in external aggression from without. And so we need to appreciate and respect those like Justice Aslan, who have stood up and combated injustice, invoked the notion that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, reminding me of the teachings of my parents, who were my first teachers with respect to what justice is all about. And it was my father of blessed memory who taught me at a very young age, before I understood really the profundity of his message, when he used to say to me that the pursuit of justice is equal to all the other commandments combined. This, as he put it, must be that which you teach unto your children. But I have to say that it was my mother who, also of blessed memory, when she would hear my father saying this, she would say to me that if you want to pursue justice, you have to understand, you have to feel the injustice about you. You have to go in and about your community and beyond and feel the injustice and combat the injustice. Otherwise, the pursuit of justice will remain a theoretical abstraction. And so I suspect that as a result of the teachings of my parents, and my great mentor, Elie Wiesel, the conscience of humanity, who worked in such close collaboration with Vaclav Havel, who themselves initiated the Prague Forum 2000 in 1996. A result of these influences that I got involved in the two great human rights struggles of the second half of the 20th century. The struggle for human rights in the former Soviet Union and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And got involved in the defense of the two people who became the face, the voice, the identity of those struggles. As Michael said, of Anatoly Sharansky in the former Soviet Union and of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And those two prisoners of conscience became, for me, the normative role models of what pursuing justice is all about, as Wiesel and Havel continued to do that for me, moving into the struggle for human rights and combating injustice in the 21st century. And I had the pleasure of being here at one point in the awarding of an honorary degree and speaking at that convocation here at Charles University to Vaclav Havel in 2006, at the Dissidents Conference that we held here in 2007. So I have fond memories and remembrances and reminders of what the struggle for human rights is all about from my own modest engagement with people like Vaclav Havel and Elie Wiesel. And so on this important moment of remembrance and reminder, because I say this because we are moving and we are on the eve of what I would call the 70th anniversary year of two great historic moments that bear remembrance and reminder. I'm referring to the Genocide Convention of December 9th, 1948, and the Universal Genocide Convention, sometimes referred to as the Never Again Convention, but which tragically has been violated again and again. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of December 10th, 1948, referred to at times as the Magna Carta for human rights, but whose rights have been violated again and again. And so on this important moment of remembrance and reminder, I'd like to frame my remarks around two questions. Number one, what have we learned? And two, no less important, what must we do? As our Havel Prize nominees have exemplified in their own action and affirmation. And so let me summarize a series of what I would call universal lessons for the pursuit of justice and the combating of injustice, very much inspired by the teachings and actions of Elie Wiesel and Vaclav Havel. The first is the danger of forgetting and the imperative of remembrance, of le devoir de mémoire, of, as Elie Wiesel put it, of memory as a sacred duty, of remembering horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened, of the Holocaust, as Elie Wiesel put it once here in the Prague 2000 conference, of the Holocaust as a war against the Jews, in which not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were targeted victims, of the Roma, as Michael put it, as being a litmus test with respect to also le devoir de mémoire, our responsibility to memory and our duty to act, of remembering victims defamed, dehumanized, demonized as prologue and justification for their ultimate killing and murder. And where the mass murder of 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jews is not a matter of abstract statistics. Unto each person there is a name. Each person is an identity. Each person is a universe. As the Talmud tells us, and as Father Sport cited this morning, if you save a single life, it is as if you have saved an entire universe. Just as if you kill a single person, it is as if you have killed an entire universe. And so the first lesson that we must always remember and act upon, that we are each, wherever we are, the guarantors of each other's destiny. And as the Czech novelist Milan Kundera put it, that the struggle of memory against forgetting is a struggle of freedom against tyranny. Brings me now to the second lesson, and that is the danger of state-sanctioned cultures of incitement and hate, of the responsibility to prevent and protect. The Holocaust and the genocides that followed in former Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, occurred not only because of the machinery of death, but because of these state-sanctioned ideologies of hate. It is this teaching of contempt, this demonizing of the other, this is where it all begins. As the Supreme Court of Canada put it in a telling judgment, and I quote their words, that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chamber, said the court. It began with words. These are the catastrophic effects of racism. These, as the court put it, are the chilling facts of history. And in another very important precedent, which occurred when I was Minister of Justice and Attorney General in 2005, in what has come to be known as the Mugesera case, it is not as well known as it should be. Leon Mugesera came to Canada in 1992 from Rwanda and sought refugee status. As the case proceeded through the courts, it soon became clear that he had been involved in the state-sanctioned incitement to hate in Rwanda, which had culminated in the genocide there. And so the court moved to have him charged and convicted of crimes against humanity and be deported. His defense was, but I came to Canada in 1992 to seek refugee status. The genocide in Rwanda occurred in 1994. How can you say I'm responsible for crimes against humanity? And the court said that the very incitement to genocide constitutes the crime in and of itself, whether or not acts of genocide followed. And so his very incitement to genocide constituted the criminality which resulted in his deportation, which brings me now to the third lesson. And that is, and I want to commend our honorees because they have given expression to the importance of this lesson. And that is the danger of silence in the face of evil. The imperative of standing up against injustice. And if I may quote Elie Wiesel on this point, echoing words also stated by Vaclav Havel when he says, we must always take sides, and this was during his 1986 Nobel Peace Prize lecture. We must always take sides, said Elie Wiesel. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And then in words which we heard also and would resonate from Vaclav Havel, whenever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. And he added, and I quote, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest against injustice. And so, at a time when there are too many people who are not prepared to stand up, let alone to be counted, it's our responsibility to stand up against injustice again and act against it, as our prize nominees have shown. The next lesson, and lesson number 4 here, the danger of, and here too, taught by both Wiesel and Havel, the dangers of indifference and inaction in the face of mass atrocity and genocide, our responsibility to prevent and protect. This painful and poignant lesson resides in the simple truth that these genocides resulted not only from state-sanctioned incitement to hatred and genocide, but from crimes of indifference, from the conspiracies of silence, from the international community as a bystander, if not as an enabler. The Rwandan genocide is a painful reminder of all this. From April to the end of June 1994, 10,000 Rwandans, most of them Tutsis, were murdered every single day. 1 million Rwandans murdered in less than 3 months. But what makes the genocide of the Tutsis so unspeakable is not only the horror of the genocide. That is bad enough. What makes it so unspeakable is that this genocide was preventable. Nobody can say that we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Just as with regard to Darfur, nobody could say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Just as with regard to the last 6 years in Syria, 6.5 years now, nobody could say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. And those of us who some 6 years ago, in the fall of 2011, called, as with Vaclav Havel, for the invocation of the responsibility to protect doctrine, which says that if in any country we are witnessing war crimes, crimes against humanity, or God forbid genocide, and the government in that country is unable or unwilling to do anything about it, or worse, is the author of those mass atrocities and crimes against humanity, then it is the responsibility, as Havel put it, the responsibility of the international community to intervene and protect the targeted innocent civilians. But those of us who called for that protective intervention in Syria were told, well, if you intervene, and this was at a time when there were, quote unquote, only 7,000 that had been killed, only when there were, quote unquote, 10,000 displaced. We were told, well, if you intervene, this will lead to sectarian warfare. This will lead to civil war. This will lead to jihadists coming in. Everything we were told would happen if we intervened happened because we didn't intervene. And as we meet now, close to 600,000 have been killed. Some 13 million Syrians understand the human agony and pain behind those statistics. 13 million Syrians have been displaced. More than 5 million have become refugees, are the consequence of our abandonment of the responsibility to protect. They're not the cause of our problems today. And so by not intervening when we should, we now bear responsibility for those consequences. Which leads me now to the next lesson. And that is the dangers of cultures of impunity. The responsibility to bring war criminals and human rights violators to justice. If the last century, symbolized by the Holocaust, Rwanda, and former Yugoslavia, the age of atrocity, it was also the age of impunity. Few of the perpetrators were brought to justice. And so let there be no mistake about it. Impunity emboldens the war criminal and encourages more war crimes. Lesson number 6, and I'll move quickly to close here. La trahison d'éclair, the betrayal of the elites, and as Havel would put it, the responsibility to speak truth to power. Simply put, the Holocaust was made possible not only because of the bureaucratization of genocide, as Robert Lifton put it, but it was made possible because of the trahison d'éclair, the betrayal of the elites, as personified by the desk murderer Adolf Eichmann. the complicity of physicians, faith leaders, judges, lawyers, engineers, architects, and educators. As Elie Wiesel put it, Holocaust crimes were the crimes of the Nuremberg elites. And as Havel put it, it is our responsibility always to speak truth to power and to hold power accountable to truth. The double entendre of Nuremberg, the Nuremberg of hate and the Nuremberg of judgments, must be part of our legacy as well as part of our learning. A seventh lesson, and that is the danger of assaults on the vulnerable and the powerless. Again, reminded by Havel of our responsibility to intervene. And as Professor Henry Friedlander pointed out in his book on the origins of genocide, the first group singled out for genocide in the Holocaust were the Jewish disabled. And so it is our responsibility, as Havel would put it, to give voice to the voiceless and to empower the powerless, be they the disabled, the poor, elderly women victimized by violence, or vulnerable children, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. And when we speak about these crimes, the violence against women, and today is the International Day for Girls, let us remember that these crimes not only attended the genocides or were in consequence of it, but they were in fact in pursuit of it. And some 70 years later, these lessons remain to be learned, whether we talk about horrific crimes against women in the Congo or in Syria. And we must appreciate that significant numbers of the world's population are routinely subject to rape, assault, torture, starvation, humiliation, mutilation, and even murder simply because they are female. And with regard to children, and that is also the work of one of our nominees today, my daughter taught me one of the most important lessons on human rights here. When she came to me when she was 15 years of age, she said to me, today she's 37, she said, "Daddy, if you want to know what the test of human rights is all about, then always ask yourself, at any time, in any situation, in any part of the world, is it good for children? Is what is happening good for children? That's the real test of human rights, Daddy." And moving to a close, and with particular reference to some of the themes today of remembrance and reminder, the dangers of the bystander community, the responsibility to remember and to pay tribute to the rescuers. And I'm speaking here in terms of the righteous among the nations, of whom Raoul Wallenberg, an honorary citizen of Canada and elsewhere, is metaphor and message. We have to appreciate that from May to the beginning of July 1944, some 440,000 Jews were deported to the death camps in Auschwitz. This at a time when nobody could say that we did not know what was happening. Raoul Wallenberg arrived in the Swedish legation in Budapest. From mid-July to the end of 1944, Raoul Wallenberg, along with others who he involved with him, saved the remnant of 100,000 Jews. So what the international community as bystanders could not do when 440,000 were deported to the death camps, one person was able to show how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act can confront evil, can prevail and transform history. And in light of our honorees today, I just want to mention two other lessons, and with this I close. And that is the importance of defending political prisoners such as Justice Aslan, our Havel Prize nominee, in Turkey. And I learned about the importance of defending political prisoners because it not only shines a spotlight on the human rights violator country, but if you free the political prisoner, you can transform history. Let us recall that Nelson Mandela endured 27 years in a South African prison and emerged to not only become president of South Africa, but to usher in the first democratic, free, egalitarian South Africa. And so we must always remember, with respect to our responsibility to political prisoners, to let them know that they are not alone, that we stand in solidarity with them, whether we are speaking about a Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia, or Leopoldo Lopez in Venezuela, or Father Bourgedi in Iran, or Wang Bizang in China. It's our responsibility to stand in solidarity with them, that we will not relent in our advocacy, that the release of political prisoners must be a priority on our human rights agenda as a matter of principle and policy. And the release of those prisoners can have, and this would be true as well of Justice Aslan in Turkey, can have a transformative impact on our politics and on our freedom and democracy. And so the last lesson, but particularly poignant in terms of Prague 2000. Yesterday, at the close of the conference, we launched the Prague Appeal for Democratic Renewal at a time when we are witnessing threats to democracy from within and without, at a time when we are witnessing not only the resurgent global authoritarianism of which I spoke, but also the illiberal populism, extremism from the right and the left, and I can go on. You know these threats as well as I do. And that's why the importance not only of the Prague Appeal, but also the importance of what we did of launching an international coalition for democratic renewal that will not only affirm the normative principles of democracy and its universal resonance in the service of democracy and freedom, but that we will act so as to preserve it, and we will act so as to secure it. And finally, a pledge of Elie Wiesel. His last act was to preside over the Never Again conference that we had in Jagiellonian University in Poland in 2016. And at that conference, we adopted unanimously a Never Again declaration. I will close just with an excerpt from it because it was inspired by the words of Elie Wiesel, by the legacy of Vaclav Havel. And it says as follows: that never again will we be indifferent to incitement and hate. That never again will we be silent in the face of evil. That never again will we indulge racism and hatred and anti-Semitism of any kind. That never again will we ignore the plight of the vulnerable. And never again will we be indifferent in the face of mass atrocity and impunity. But we will speak up, and no less important, we will act against indifference, against racism, against hate, against mass atrocity, against injustice, and against the crime of crimes whose name we should even shudder to mention, namely genocide. This is the legacy of Elie Wiesel. This is the legacy of Vaclav Havel. This is the basis of the launching of the appeal for democratic renewal, which we must now act upon to secure our democracies, to secure our freedoms, and to protect our human rights. Thank you.